Pikachu.
And together we are the Literary Detectives. So today we're going to talk about the absolutely strange, weird, and wonderful story behind the making of Mary Shelley's novel, Frankenstein. So it was 1816, the year without a summer. In 1815, an Indonesian volcano had erupted, Mount Tambora. And it sent the climate of Europe haywire. It was a dark and stormy summer. For poor people, the summer meant starvation. But for people like the Shelleys, it meant a dreary vacation. In 1816, Mary Shelley and her husband, Percy Bysshe Shelley, visited Switzerland, where they became neighbors of the mad, bad, and dangerous to know Lord Byron. He was a famous poet and was busy writing his masterpiece, Childe Harold. He was there with his 18-year-old lover and his personal doctor, John Polidori.
It was a wet, cold summer. Right after them into the house, they read German ghost stories to each other to pass the time. One night, Brian challenged each to write a ghost story.
Mary tried to come up with a ghost story for days, but just couldn't. One night, after listening to an après beach story about the nature of life and the principles of existence, Mary had a horrible nightmare about a horrible creature. She woke in terror and started her story. She conceived of a reanimated corpse made of manufactured parts brought together and imbued with vital warmth.
Her first version was a short story, but she finally turned it into a novel.
She called it Frankenstein, a Modern Prometheus. It's the story of a mad scientist who tries to create life and who ends up giving birth to a monster he can't control.
It changed how we view the ideas of life, death, and being.
You know, usually when I go to the cottage, I just take a nap.
Me too. Let's talk a little about Mary Shelley.
At the age of 16, she eloped with Percy Bysshe Shelley, who was married at the time to Harriet Westbrook. In 1816, Harriet killed herself, so the two were eventually married. Percy Bysshe Shelley was a pioneer of the English Romantic movement, along with his friends Lord Byron and John Keats. He was the author of Prometheus Unbound, Censo, and Adonis. After he died in a tragic shipwreck, his body was cremated on the Italian coast, and as it was burning, his friend snatched his heart out of the flames and kept it as a souvenir. A fellow poet finally got hold of the heart and sent it to Mary Shelley, who kept his withered heart wrapped in a piece of silk in her leather-bound copy of Adonis for over 30 years.
And all I got for you for Valentine's Day was a lousy card.
Aw, and I loved it. Anyways, back to Mary. She began writing Frankenstein when she was 18. Now, by this time, she had already born and lost 2 children, and she describes the creature in her book as a miserable and abandoned abortion. And as her scientist rejects his monster, who then grows up in isolation and alienation. To say Shelley was conflicted about children is an understatement. She called the book her hideous progeny and sent it to go forth and prosper.
Miss K, tell me about the Georgian age. I hear there was a lot of weird stuff happening then.
It sure was, Pikachu. The beauty routines included makeup that was filled with lead, arsenic, and ammonia. Sanitation was awful. The Thames River was so filled with sewage and animal parts that you could practically walk across it, and that was the main source of drinking water for the City of London. The streets were disgusting. In 1891, a Lady Harberton reported that after a short walk through the city streets of London, her long dress had collected 2 cigar ends, 9 cigarettes, a pork pie, 4 matches, 2 toothpicks, one slice of cat's meat, half a sole of a man's boot, one plug of chewed tobacco, straw, mud, and street refuge. Ugh. And that was just during one short walk.
That may have been because dresses were so wide that women could get stuck indoors. Yikes.
Ugh. Their food wasn't much cleaner. Food was often contaminated with chalk, arsenic, and talc, and bakers often kneaded their bread with their feet.
Yuck. I hope their feet were cleaner than mine. Miss Kay, I hear that you can make a living as a game robber. Is this true?
Yes. Medical schools could only get bodies for dissection from executions, and this led to a big shortage. There weren't enough dead bodies to go around, so people got them from cemeteries. They were called resurrectionists.
I thought they were a Christian rock band.
No, resurrectionists were people who dug up bodies to sell them to make money, and the fresher, the better. Sometimes cemeteries installed watchtowers and guards, so people and snatchers had to be creative. Some just murdered people to get the bodies. No digging. Now, some people were scared of being buried alive, and they would pay people to watch over their graves. They would have a little bell tied to their finger that they could ring from inside their coffin if they were buried alive. In Frankenstein, the horrible methods from which Victor gets his bodies adds to the horror of the novel.
But wait, Miss Kay, I'm confused. I thought this is Frankenstein.
Well, Pikachu, yes and no. In the novel, Victor Frankenstein is the scientist who is determined to penetrate the secrets of life and living. And in the book, neither Victor nor Mary Shelley give the creature a name. So in chapter 16, the creature confronts Victor and calls him his father, his creator. So he thinks of himself as a Frankenstein, and he later refers to himself as a biblical Adam. So if the monster in Frankenstein has to have a name, I guess he would be self-identified as Adam Frankenstein. But it's equally correct, though, to have him called the creature or the monster.
I have another question. The book is called Frankenstein. Amon and Prometheus. Who is Prometheus?
Prometheus?
Prometheus.
Prometheus. Well, that's another excellent question. Prometheus was a Greek titan who's credited with forming humanity out of clay and stealing fire and giving it to men. And he was punished by Zeus to eternal torment for this. He was bound to a rock where each day an eagle was sent to pick out his liver, and his liver every day would grow back overnight. What a weird story.
I'm kind of grossed out now.
Well, you have to love the Greeks. So anyways, that's a little bit about Mary Shelley and her creation of a Gothic parable about a scientist and his creation that he brought forth. So it's one of the most recognizable monsters of all time. But still you ask, what happened to the other ghost stories that they had in the scary writing contest? Well, nothing much came of the stories that Percy and Lord Byron wrote. But remember, there's another person, the doctor, John Polidori, and he wrote a little story called The Vampire, which kind of is now widely recognized as the start of the romantic vampire genre. So his book influenced a guy named Bram Stoker, who went on to write, of course, Dracula.
So One Gold Red Vacation gave us both Frankenstein and Dracula?
Yes, both Frankenstein and Dracula. Yes, Pikachu, it did. So though a scary writing contest isn't exactly what you'd expect a group of free-thinking young people to do at their summer beach vacation, the world is sure glad that they did.
Well, thank you for joining us.
Yes, we hope you learned something interesting today. And thanks for visiting
visiting
the Literary Detectives!